Okay, what we're up to today is I'm working on a web project, web series, a fan series project technically, um, and I'm doing some special effects work in Davinci Resolve Fusion. Davinci Resolve is a color correction suite originally. To step back even further, Blackmagic is a company that started out doing like hardware type stuff. I think they're British. Um, and then they had this color correction suite, DaVinci Resolve, and then they tried to integrate editing stuff into it because people like to edit. Um, and then now they're basically trying to integrate special effects stuff in it to compete directly with the Adobe suite, which I'm fine with. Love competition, even though I've had an Adobe subscription since subscriptions started on that, and I've been using Adobe stuff since 2000, probably early adopter of InDesign, Photoshop. Didn't use a lot of Illustrator until I got a job doing packaging, and then I had to draw a whole bunch of shit and do a whole bunch of vector art. So that's where I kind of learned how to do Illustrator stuff. So the idea is that you, much like the Adobe suite, you should theoretically be able to be editing your footage and color correcting your footage and then doing special effects on your footage the same way that you can do in the Adobe products. I started using the color correction stuff. I think they're on version 15 point something now, and I think I started using the color corrected stuff or the color correction software around version 8 or 9. Super hardcore learning curve, to be blunt. They do, oh, and we're done exporting. So for a second, what you're going to see is I'm gonna check out what the export looked like here. This is our Birds of Prey miniseries that we're doing, our web series basically, which is a DC Comics property. We wrote some episodes, God, like 2015-ish, 14-ish or something. Finally got around to filming the stuff this last year and got everything filmed, and now we're in post-production. So what I'm doing now is basically trying to design some smart glasses for Oracle instead of having like a bank of computers, although she uses a bank of computers at some point in the show. That's what I was afraid of. For some reason, the first part of this didn't show up. So anyway, oh, there we go. So I've been basically designing these little HUD glasses. That's actually pretty cool. And what I realized, so I'm not a special effects guy, so anybody that's watching this that's a special effects guy are going to go like, duh, fucking idiot, when I talk about all this stuff. But it's all shit that I've had to learn on my fucking own for the most part and watching some tutorials and that kind of thing. So I originally were trying to design all these elements kind of at the same time and having it crash and having my computer lug down and all this other shit. And so I figured out, oh shit, I need to take all these individual elements that I want to do and fucking export them basically into video files, and then I can kind of reassemble shit in a two-part process. So that's what's happening. This is basically DaVinci Resolve. It has individual tabs at the bottom for each sort of function that you want to do. You got media, edit, fusion, color, Fairlight, and deliver. Fairlight is sound, so I don't really work with that too much. I have a sound guy that does that, so I'm not going to have to worry about that. I love doing color correction, so that's this tab. Fusion is special effects, editing is editing, and then the media is basically how you pull all the stuff in. So right now what I have set up here is an editing timeline with this clip of these HUD glasses that I want to stick in here. I'm not worried about the footage yet, because what I have done, as you can see here, what I basically have already done is set up a 3D plane and tracked it to the actor's movements. Nice laggy bits. But you can sort of see that moving around a little bit, and then I'll go back in and kind of like touch the edges and do that kind of stuff. I always, this actually is pretty good, but I have this really good talent for sort of stopping the timeline at the most awkward fucking pose that an actor does. So they'll be all like, yeah, ready to say something, and I'll just be like, stop, and it'll be there. And someday it'd be awesome to have like a whole clip show of just like actors pulling faces, basically. Most of the hard work is sort of set up in the respect of I'm just going to be able to composite or put together all these different video clips that I'm going to be exporting out. And I'll be able to kind of composite them on a thing that's already tracked. And I equate it kind of like, you know, because I'm fucking old, you hear stories about the musicians before there were any kind of like digital layering recording shit when they were working on literal like 8-track tape. Bohemian Rhapsody is a good example because that's all up in the news everywhere nowadays. They, you record 8 soundtracks or you record 8 tracks of different things, and then you mix all those down into a single track and record 7 more. Or you come over here and you record 8 and you mix all those down into a track, and then that gets put on this one. And then when that one's full of 8 tracks, which are essentially 8 times 8, 64 tracks worth of stuff that's been mixed, you can mix that down even further and just keep going that way. And I think there was a quote from probably Brian May or Roger Taylor, one that was from Queen, talking about like, yeah, we had pieces of 8-track tape when we were doing Bohemian Rhapsody that were essentially clear because all the magnetic shit on them had been worn off from the number of times we were recording over the top of it, basically. So it's kind of a digital version of that. I have an idea to do all these different graphics, and I'll export them all individually and then composite them separately onto this so that my computer, which is a fairly decent computer. I mean, I think an i9 Intel card. I have 64 gigs of RAM. I have a 1080 Ti video card. So this computer is not some old like laptop piece of shit. It's a good computer. A little outdated, but good. So it should be able to be handling this stuff. These are the smart glasses. We're going to go into the little Fusion tab here. And I don't know if we can call this a direct tutorial because it's not going to be formalized as far as like going through every single step, but hopefully it's useful for some of you, or hopefully it's just interesting to fucking listen to me blather on about shit. So these little nodes are essentially special effects stuff or things that are going on. For example, this little node right here is the little black canary symbol that I want to appear on the thing. And then underneath this is a transform node, which basically, I guess, made it move and I think probably get lighter, although the image plane might have done that. Oh, the image plane did that. So this third node is basically a 3D node, which puts it into 3D space, right? So this is that little doodad, and I will eventually attach it to this mess right here. So what's going on are these are all the individual elements that I've sort of designed and at one time had plugged into the main element. But this media out over here, that's the export. Whatever's on this, and there's, as any of you that have used Fusion or have watched other Fusion tutorials know, you have 2 monitors, or you can have 2 monitors. These 2 little dots underneath all of these little things are basically telling you if it appears on a monitor. So there's no dots there, meaning this little black canary logo, specifically this node, does not appear on a monitor. However, we see it because these are all connected and we're looking at this, which is nodes. I mean, it's nodes or layers, right? After Effects works in layers. Adobe stuff works in layers for the most part. And Davinci works in nodes. I worked in Adobe for a long time, like I said, so me learning the color stuff where I'm having to design node trees for things to happen was really hard. And now that I'm in Fusion, it was a little easier because I'd done the color thing, but Fusion has some really odd little fucking rules that you kind of have to know, and there's not a lot of tutorials out there. There's hardly any tutorials out there, actually. So weird little shit like this is a merge node, which is theoretically grabbing this text, which is probably just some random text thing that's being generated, and this background, which is color essentially. And then, so for example, you would take this background, which is black, and you might do the equivalent of a map. Like you can't literally take the background and shrink it down and make it a different thing. You have to use a second node, which is called a rectangle node in this case. Or you can create a circle. I mean, all the tools are right here. So there's a circle, there's using the pen tool. You're basically creating a mask. You're creating a cutout that you see this background through, and then it's invisible. And this has rounded corners, which is a feature you can do over here because there's all these various controls. So corner radius, that is 0, and I turned it slightly up to 0.15 so that I had these neat little rounded um, things on here. And then I wanted to put text over the top of it, so I have to design the text separately over here, and then I have to merge them into one, I can't even say it's a layer, but basically one object, right? And then I am now turning that object into a 3D object for the actual thing, right? Oh, so yeah, there's the text showing up. And what's interesting about this is this merge node is not 3D. So I can move the text around on the background or off the background however I want. However, they're not on the same plane because otherwise this would be black. It would be embedded in this basically. But as a two-dimensional thing, essentially, they're like the background and the. You guys seen that? Okay, good. The background and the text. I can't do this and make it come out from the background, right? It basically can only slide this way, and that's it. When you have 3D layering, which is this going to show up? When these little things are red, it usually means fuck you. So I'm not super hopeful that this one is going to show up. Will that one show up? Nope, even though it's lit. And that's mainly a RAM issue. So the idea is when you have this image plane, that's a 3D thing. So I could basically grab this entire bit. I still can't separate the text in the background, right? But I could move this entire bit separately from this entire bit. So for example here, let me find the 3D, I always forget which one it is. There we go. So there's a 3D merge node, which is different from the 2D merge node because it works in 3D. See how that works? So here's the 3D merge node, and we'll zoom in on this thing a little bit. Not very good, I guess. Nope, too much. And this is the awesome thing of not knowing what a lot of the keys are. Plus, I use a Wacom tablet as opposed to a mouse, so it's probably a little bit easier using mouse stuff. But as you can tell, these two separate objects, you've got this vertical and this horizontal, they are squished together and set. However, because I'm on this little merge node, I can grab this little doohickey and move all of it at the same time, like a dummy. I can grab this little doohickey. Let's do that. So now I've selected one of the image planes, and now when I move that one, you can see it moves apart, basically. So now it's in 3D. So I can have it come back through here, or come back here, do whatever. In this case, it matters a little bit when the person is like turning their head and you want to see that separation if you want to have them separated. It could also affect how color works. If one of them was a different color and less opaque, then you could either see the prominent color in front of it, or if it dropped behind, you'd see like a shadowy version of it back there. So that's all of that stuff, right? So to get specific, right now I'm trying to figure out why that animation that I exported didn't start right from the beginning. So when we come back to here, basically, and we throw that up there, which isn't going to work for some reason. See, sometimes when I turn it, there we go. When I turn them off, and then the RAM is like, oh, I can handle that, or the GPU, or whatever this fucking thing is using. So this is this little merge mode. This is the export, just showing me kind of what the front export is. These are safe areas, so these won't actually be exported. These are just little things you can pop up to know what your aspect ratio is and to make sure stuff doesn't fall outside of it and get clipped off. We're at the very beginning of this, and I can see right here, frame 0, and there is stuff here. So when I go down the line, stuff happens like it's supposed to. So then I attach this guy. This goes red immediately. But when I click on this doohickey, this is turned up to here, but that theoretically, it's not theoretical. This should not, this is this image plane. So it should not be affecting these other two image planes, right? I have it also set so we can do this. Show only selected tools is a really good thing to get rid of complication. So when I click that off, this is all the shit that's going on in this thing right now, right? So a simpler way would be to do this and then maybe just highlight these. There we go. So we've got this one, and this one, which are these two, because I wanted it to kind of come in late, separate from the main three. So these main three should be showing me, they should be like rendering stuff out basically, and for some reason they're not. So the color kind of matters because the little green things usually mean foreground and the little yellow things mean background. But when you throw it all on a big old 3D node like this, they start just doing these little white ones. Oh, proxy mode. So it tends to, there we go. It tends to automatically like turn off proxy mode for some reason when I close the program down. This is what today is basically, and I'll go through and chop some of this out. There's a lot of little controls up here. So for example, here's Fusion. You can go to Fusion settings, and this is where you can figure out how your proxy stuff is, right? And my proxies are maxed out right now. This slider, this is basically, I think, a resolution thing, basically. So it's 30 to 1, meaning blurry or less resolute than 1 to 1. And so that's cranked up all the way. And I have update all and all of that turned up, so that doesn't matter. So what I'm going to try to do now is export it again, which means I'll go over here to the Deliver tab. I say awkwardly, and as I can see here, there's nothing. This should be something. So now when I come up to here, oh look, here it all is again, right? So I don't know what's going on. So now I'm going to go back to here. I'm going to check on this. That also happens, same thing. And then when it does come on, if it eventually comes on here, there we go. We get all three of these things where I want these two and this one to go first, and then I want these other two things to go after it. So yeah, I don't know if it's just a straight up fucking ramp thing or what the deal is. I might have to export these three out separately from those other three, which I'm getting pretty near to doing because there's really no reason for me not to, or there's no reason for me to spend like a shitload of time on this when I know that I can just sort of specifically export things to try to figure out how to make it work. Like, who cares? So let's try that. So that's just those three little text blocks. We're going to go up here. We're going to use the wall of text, but now we're going to number it 01 because we know there's going to be more than one wall of text. It'll also help me to be able to like separate those in 3D space too, actually, which would be kind of cool. So we're going to save that. We've got this all set up on custom because I'm using the 2:3:9 aspect ratio as opposed to 16:9 because I just like that cinematic look. So if I wanted to do like super high, like if I was really worried, if this wasn't like a freaking fan series, web series, I might try to export this out at like the super highest or lack of compression that I possibly could in order to kind of retain it as it gets sort of dumbed down. But I'm actually kind of okay with it getting dumbed down because I'm going to need to blur it out a little bit anyway because it's like dummy text. And I don't want the audience to necessarily see everything clearly because you wouldn't be able to, and it's not 4K anyway. So all of that said, we add this to the render queue. I get rid of the other one because I just am OCD that way. And then I start rendering. And once again, I will not make you watch all the fucking render of this, so it'll cut to when the render is done. All right, so it's about done now. We're at 99, and doink! Completed. One of the reasons that this takes, or this specific thing is taking so long, is its text, random text generation-y stuff, right? So some of these other node clumps, this one, for example, will probably render pretty quickly, or at least be able to be seen by the RAM and all the rest of that. But this is all like these gigantic blocks of text. And then you basically, so I've created a bunch of dummy text. I have a random write on. Write on is the thing where text literally gets written on. So it starts from nothing and goes to text. You can right click on a lot of these things and add expressions to them, or what would the equivalent of be expressions. And this one I have perturbed on. Which you can find modify with, and then I went down and grabbed perturbed. These aren't highlighted because it's already applied to it. So if I was to remove perturbed, then I could reapply perturbed if I wanted. Anyway, so that's making that write-on function happen randomly throughout the thing, right? It just different times. And then on top of which, I added a randomization to the text itself, which is what this randomness little slider is for. So the text is changing letter by letter and line by line constantly through the what I think is a 2-minute timeline. So that is a lot of fucking processing. What we're going to do now is grab that little export. There it is. Oh, seeing it started right away, even though I'm going to blow it up a little bigger just for fun here. Past 100% because this is a 4K monitor and this was obviously exported pretty small. But bam, and so now you can see all the letters are changing like every single time. The lines length are doing all kinds of crazy shit. So this is essentially what's called texture. It's not going to be anything that's going to be up in the viewer's face. It's going to be kind of the background of the glasses so that it looks like kind of shit is going on underneath the surface the whole time. And now what I'll do is I'll come back up in here and I'll disconnect these little hodads here and grab these two. And now I'll actually see whether these are an issue. They are actually, which is very weird. So there's some little glitch or some little weird thing that's happening with these two things specifically. And every time I set them up, the same thing happens. And maybe it has to do with this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this little guy because we're just tired of fucking with this basically. And now look, it shows up. Everything shows up the way that it's supposed to. So I think what I'll do is I'll connect these. We're going to be crafty about this once again. Here's what these are. So this one's over the top because I just made a copy of it, obviously. Those ones are over the top of something, right? So I'm going to grab that and I'm going to shuffle this and maybe move it up and to right about there because I think that would be cool. And then I'm going to make another copy of, let's say, this one or this one, because why not? And we're going to throw that over there. We're going to attach it. And this one is over the top of, do a little middle mouse here to move the screen around. And you'll be able, oh yeah, so that one actually was the right one, or quote unquote right one. So I'm going to move that up into here, right? So this is helping me visually just kind of make sure that they're where I want them to be. Which doesn't have to be precise. I just kind of like, okay, there. Now I've already exported these out. So I'm going to disconnect them and basically export these two out. And what's going to happen then is instead of trying to, so what this does is adjust the starting point. And I'm thinking that that is what the issue is. Something's happening that's making them break. And I don't want to sit here again for an hour and try to figure out what kind of weird little glitch is happening on that. So I'm going to export them out and then I'll just physically trim them like you would a normal edit and make them start where I want them to start. So fuck it. So this becomes 2 because base wall of text 2. This gets thrown over here. This gets deleted because OCD. And then bam, I hit render and then there it goes, right? And so this might take the same amount of time as the other one. It might be shorter because there's less text. I don't know. Either way, you don't have to watch it. You're welcome. There. And that's basically what's going on there. Now, one thing I just realized is I didn't export those, and I'm not sure how to export those. I didn't export them with an alpha channel, which is a thing that you can do in After Effects fairly easily. So I'm going to have to go back through and re-export stuff, redo the whole process. All right, so I did a little bit of internet research to try to figure out how to export transparency layers. And a lot of it's ProRes related, which doesn't help me at all because I'm on a PC. And then the other one is DNX HR 444. The interesting thing about it, of course, is like all things, you look it up on the internet and you find a bunch of assholes in the forum saying, you should read the fucking instruction manual. It's so fucking obvious. It's on page X or whatever. And being complete fucking douchebags about it, which the Blackmagic forums are, I think, probably like any other forums, basically. I've put what I thought was fairly legitimate questions up there and been ignored and had like 0 responses. And then I've seen responses to people where people are just being fucking jerks about things. And the problem is that you've got an instruction manual that is 2,000 to 3,000 pages long. And good for you if you're one of those people who have read all of that and somehow like memorized all the shit. But for anybody it's a barrier basically for anybody that's kind of a casual user about things, because for one thing, you may not even know the correct terminology to look up, like the difference between alpha channel and transparency, and they're kind of interchangeable, but maybe in the manual they're not. And so you're like trying to search on your PDF for transparency, and you're getting a bunch of things that doesn't matter because you don't know whether to look up alpha channel. Or you're coming from another piece of software like After Effects that's calling, in this case, calling it relatively the same. But there are other examples of things that After Effects uses as far as terminology that Resolve doesn't. So if I'm trying to look up that thing and type it into the thing and not getting any results, then my options are to spend 10 fucking hours looking through a 2,000 page book, or posting something and having somebody that does know that or has done that journey maybe be a nice person for once and just be like, oh, it's this. If you want some more information on it, it's on page this of the manual. The end. Without any kind of passive aggressive bullshit about like, all you needed to do was look in the manual and blah, 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 blah. Fuck you. We know we're supposed to look in the manual. We're trying to save time, basically. And someday there are things that I know that I'm going to be able to look into there because I've done independent research on something, because you can't find an answer and then you answer the question and not be a dick about it. So anyway, that's my little rant as far as that stuff is concerned. It's gatekeeping is all it is. It's just fucking gatekeeping. It can suck a dick. I'm going to try this DNX HR 444, even though I have no idea if it's going to work, because again, no one can, it's supposed to, but there's supposed to be a little checkbox along here that says blah, 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 transparency or blah, 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 alpha, but that was probably in an earlier version, probably in 12.5 or maybe 14, and they've removed it, potentially because it's just, hopefully because it happens automatically, which would be beneficial, would be a bonus. So anyway, we're going to pop that over to the render queue and let's render. And then, oh, this is number one. I can already tell that I fucked that part of it up. So anyway, we'll see what happens. All right, we're back to try to do some exporting again. And I finally figured it out after my little rant about fucking forums and some other shit. Here's a perfect fucking example of why you should not be a dick in forums, but actually be fucking helpful. And the idea is that in theory, according to the book, the instruction book that I looked up, over here, when you set it to the right settings, you're supposed to get an alpha channel toggle switch that you can basically toggle, which sounds pretty easy. So I go up here and I go QuickTime, and then I go to here and then I do HNX HR, and then 444 12-bit, because why the fuck not? I'll have lots of color shit. Now, I did mine at a different aspect ratio. So for right now, I'm just going to leave this because I don't want to go in here. I guess I can custom it. So let's just do that. So let's just go 804 the way that it's supposed to be. And then let's do cinematic. So all this stuff is ready to set. But where's my alpha button? I don't see any alpha button. Oh, you know why? Because instead of single clip, which this is, and I'd like to have it a single clip, click on individual clips. Individual clips, even though it's one clip, it's going to export one clip. And there's my thing. Now, this is a fucking nuance right here that no rational person would draw to that conclusion without just fucking clicking on a million different things. This is insider knowledge right here. This is ridiculous fucking exception knowledge, right? To figure this out. And I hunted for like a fucking hour on the internet to find it, and now I'm sharing it with you. And you know what? Here's the fucking book right here. Option to turn on the checkbox panel, the render settings, individual source. Oh, wait a second, individual source clips. Well, that means that I have to look up here and understand that single clip for some reason is an individual. So contextually, it's fucking ridiculous, and I don't think it is that out of line that I couldn't find it. So that's the other thing. So now we got to go through this whole thing instead of just like naming the clip and doing the thing. it's treating it like it's going to export out 50 clips, which means I need to come up with some sort of file name for those clips, and then it'll sort of number them. Oh, look, what's all this shit? Well, this is a thing that Resolve does where it just adds random fucking numbers and zeros on the end of shit because it thinks you're printing out 1,000 clips out of a timeline when in fact you're just printing out a single fucking clip. So I'm going to have to go in after this is done, change this file name, or somehow figure out their weird fucking numbering system for their stuff. Anyway, I like this program a lot, but it is the fucking Frankenstein's monster of random shit that got plugged in from previous versions of older programs, and they've got a bug list the size of my fucking arm, and they rightfully, hopefully, prioritize shit that just completely breaks the program. But there's some user experience things and some interface things that are clunky as fuck that they may not even realize, because the problem is most of the people in the forums don't realize it because they somehow have struggled and figured out this weird shit, or they've been using it since like version 1, and so there's sort of a natural evolution of weird shit, and they have no idea how frustrating and ridiculous it is for somebody that doesn't use this program on a full-time basis to come in. And then you've got a smaller minority who are like, fuck those guys, it's a professional program, it needs to be doing professional shit. Yes, it is a professional program, it needs to be doing professional shit, but if you ever want to grow that professional program, which seems to be the idea, they're like, oh, I want to lure people away from Adobe. That's a great idea, but your program has to be fucking accessible to people and have the kind of tutorial support and the kind of third-party people using Adobe for 15 fucking years support on the internet so that you can look a lot of this shit up and figure it out, and it just fucking doesn't. There's barely any content as far as Fusion is concerned. So it sounds like I'm mad at them, and I guess maybe a little, but I'm more just frustrated with the idea that there's not this huge wall of stuff that I can go look. And Fusion exists as a separate program, so I could go look up a whole bunch of tutorials on how to use Ion Fusion from 1960 or whenever the fuck it was out, 2005 or whatever. But a lot of that shit has changed, and some of it doesn't apply to Davinci Resolve's version of Fusion. So you've got a handful of people trying to do stuff online. One guy, JRTV, who I'll flash up the thing there on the interwebs thing, that guy's great. I watch all of his fucking tutorials. He has a lot of information. There's almost sometimes it's hard to find specific information because he's kind of zooming through stuff and doing stuff. So you end up having to watch the same video 2 or 3 times to kind of find that one little piece of thing, like the little trick about only showing one. It's not going to let me do that. But when you're in Fusion and you only want to see the tool that you've selected, like that's actually a pretty important little piece of information and should almost have its own like 30-second. Hey, JR, if you're ever watching this, how about 15 to, or maybe I'll do it, 15 to 30-second videos that are just like, here's how to do this one thing, and bam, and done. Because I get the idea that most tutorials, and I'm doing the same thing, is based around doing a project and showing someone walking through the project. And all of that is really good and great. It's hard, however, to tag all of that stuff or have in your descriptions every little tool use thing or little trick that you've used during that. So, and this isn't like singling JR out at this point at all. It's everybody that does tutorials. Everybody that does tutorials, basically what happens is you go through a project and you do your project and you can learn a lot of shit and it's great, but then you kind of have to get, like, does the description have, sometimes there's a specific tool use thing, a way to zoom in on a thing, or a way to create this little thing that those of us that are smart know you could take that little thing and apply it to like 50 other situations. But I've watched 22 videos with projects in them, so I can remember specific projects videos. But that specific tool, was that in video 12 or video 14? Do I go check the tag list? Because is it tagged? Probably not. Or is it in the description somewhere? Probably not. So all of this stuff I'm talking about, I should probably just pull the fucking trigger and do it myself. The idea of just simple little things like what I just said without all the vitriol as far as exporting transparencies, right? I need to cut that little part out without the rants on either side and be like, Davinci Resolve 15 Fusion, how to export with transparencies, 45 seconds, done. Here's the little trick for it. Here's the little trick on to figure out how to highlight just the tool you need. Here's a little trick of the fact you need a renderer, for a 3D renderer for some reason, to go to the camera goes into the merge node and then right. You can't just attach your 3D merge. You can do a regular merge node to media out, and that's fine. But to do a 3D merge node, for some reason you need a 3D renderer and a fucking camera. Why is that? I don't know. But as someone who doesn't have like a formal education in doing special effects work, but have the tools to do it, that would probably be pretty helpful for me to know if I could Google like 3D exporting from Fusion or whatever. So I get that these tutorials, I guess, have to be aimed at other professionals or other people, but I'll be honest, I think the bulk of people that go onto YouTube to find tutorials about shit are probably beginning users. And the bulk of people that go on to forums are beginning users. And there's a whole group of people out there that don't do this for a job, basically. So they're not immersed in that. They're not on the forums to talk to a bunch of other people, and they're not going to school. They just want to do a fucking video where like a dog barks and bees fly out of his mouth, and they've got this cool pictures of some bees, and they just want to be able to composite it. And the people that need to have stuff just fucking handheld and walked through, I have less sympathy for that. But guys like me that are kind of old and grizzled and know how to do fucking, attach pieces of things together to create our own things. Anyway, that's my rant. It's exported now. I'm going to go to Fusion. I'm going to grab, what I think is this probably. Got to open this stuff up. Got to increase this big old deal. Yes, alpha thing. So we'll throw that to there. We'll throw that on this little merge node. Oh, I can't just put it on the merge node because I need to have a fucking plane for some reason. So there's my image plane. Perfect example. And bam. And so that might be showing up there, but let's do this. There we go. So this is this piece of media, and it is definitely transparent. Oh, yeah, and it was just laying over the top of the other one. So success. So now, if you remember, any of you that are still watching at this point, way back at the beginning of the video, I talked about how I was going to grab pieces of things and export pieces of things in order to composite down. I can begin doing that in earnest. So aside from boring you with watching me do that for 8,000 little pieces, I'm just going to fucking do it. And then at some point, maybe, show you what the final result is. And at some point, you'll see the final product because the web series will come out and you'll be like, oh, I saw that guy doing some shit and fucking ranting on. So anyway, thanks for watching, and we'll talk to you later.